welcome to Voices from the Touchline, the podcast exploring the ideas, methods, and people shaping modern football. My guest today is Eric Clermont, an experienced USSF A-license coach, technical director, and ECNL director at Tampa Bay United, a mindset coach working one-on-one with players, and a specialist in coach education and performance psychology. Eric's background spans collegiate academy and professional football across the US, including work with the Palm Beach United, Florida International University, and South Florida Football Academy. He's also developed coaching curriculum, tactical periodization models, and talent development frameworks for multiple clubs. Today, we'll explore how coaches can move beyond classroom theory to build philosophies, programs, and players that truly perform under pressure. Eric, good to see you. Welcome to Voices from the Touchline.
Thank you. Well, a lot to live up to there. Thanks for the introduction.
No, you've already done justice in your years of coaching and your specialization across multiple domains. So yeah, let's get started then. You've developed coaching curriculum at several levels. So how do you ensure that coach education stays relevant to the realities of match day?
Yeah, so I think it's all about first and foremost, like knowing the person and player in front of you, right? I think that's probably the first thing that we speak to with our coaches, right? Very different coaching here in Tampa versus my native London, for example, even just the kids, and then the age groups, coaching a U7 compared to a U19, completely different. You know, persona and personality that you need to deal with. And then you also kind of need to know the coach's environment as well, right? So what are some of the constraints that they're dealing with? What are some of the experience that they have? Ex-players, right? Perhaps they're more positioned to coach a certain demographic of player versus maybe a teacher, which we have a lot here in the US. As it pertains to soccer and in coaching in general, right? So I think, first of all, knowing the player, knowing the coach's environment, and then obviously understanding that context is key. We need to understand the background of the player, right? So I think, player questionnaires or surveys early on throughout the season can give you a great little snapshot of who's in front of you, right? What's the family situation like, right? Are they traveling from 10 minutes away or are they traveling from 90 minutes away, right? That may affect a whole host of things. So really just the human side first and foremost, right? Um, I guess you mentioned the realities of match day. For regarding the soccer side, I think you really need to focus on that human side first because they're not going to care how much you know until they know how much you care. But then after that, then obviously we can get into the specificity of the practices and games, right? At the end of the day, as early as possible, we want to make practices look like the game, right? So the less it looks like the game, the less transferable it is. With the understanding that if they're just starting out, they're probably going to need it to be scaffolded and moved slowly into that process of preparing them for the game. So yeah, I would say those are really the different things within coach education and a whole host of other things, right, that we kind of work on.
What a start to the podcast. Now, every coach comes with their own personal philosophy. Now, you've worked in multiple roles. So, from your experience, how can clubs better support coaches in aligning their personal philosophy with the club's game model?
Yeah, great question, right? Because I think that's the constant battle that we're facing, right? We're not all like Barcelona, right? Who have a very strong philosophy and require their coaches to follow that, verbatim with regards to the practices. Here's the practices that you're going to be putting on. Here's the game model, right? We want to play this way. Most clubs really need to wrestle with that, bringing in a coach with their own ideas, their own background, perhaps from different places throughout the world, and then obviously understanding how that fits in within the game model, right? So I would say, first of all, we need to get it down on paper so that the coaches understand what the club's methodology and and philosophy and principles are, right? So of course, I think understanding what that means, and having discussions around that early on throughout the season. So a new coach comes in preseason, we need to have um, that discussion, conversation with the coach to get them to understand, okay, what's your understanding and view on this, right? So that we can kind of understand how that fits in with their own personal philosophy, right? And marrying the two is obviously the tough part, right? So there's going to be certain things that are kind of non-negotiables that the club expects, the coach to follow. And then in other areas, there's going to be a lot more flexibility, right? So I think mapping out that philosophy and the principles early on with multiple meetings to identify, okay, here's what we do when we attack, throughout the thirds, defending throughout the thirds, and then obviously attacking in defensive transition. But obviously we want that to be based around the ability of the coach to be flexible within their training sessions. And then I think just throughout the week, right? I think certain blocks throughout the week maybe can be more structured. We're working, within a specific tactical periodization block, right? 6 week, we work in 6 week blocks. And, for example, day one, we're going to be working on, let's say building out the back, within the defensive half, right? But then, as we get closer to game day, maybe it's more or less tactical. But then there are also moments within that week where, the coach has flexibility with regards to the type of practice that they want to put on, right? So we call them flex days, right? Often days, match day +1, right? Right after match day, where within the constraints physically that our strength and conditioning coach gives to us, they can do the things that they want to do, or at least the players want to do, right? So we also give opportunities for players to do things like pro time where they can go and work on IDPs and things like that. So yeah, I think those aspects. And then I guess the last thing is the importance of video, right? So video analysis, and really what I would encourage all directors to do as much as possible is link that written down philosophy with what good looks like, right? So if you want to build through the thirds or switch the point of attack to switch and slice, right? Then you want that to be very clear as to what that looks like, right? Not so much the how they're doing it, because you want that flexibility, but the what and the many different types of what, right? So having your top team, whether that be a professional or U19, right? For most clubs, maybe them, the oldest teams modeling what that looks like, so that at U10, U11, they have a model to go from within that training structure and training environment.
Well, continuing on game model, what role does performance psychology play in developing a game model that actually gets executed under pressure?
What role does performance psychology play
So
in developing a game
because,
model?
yep. Because of course, game models are great, but then the moment it's a tough game or, a challenging game, then many of us tend to really turn a blind eye towards our game model. So in that
Absolutely. Yeah,
sense,
no, I think that's a great point, right? Yeah. So, as Mike Tyson said, right, everyone's got a game plan until you get punched in the mouth. you know. So, no, absolutely. I think, look, it takes time, right? Just like anything else. And I think, you want to make it habitual. So you want it to make it a habit. So within, your, training environment, obviously training that, and not changing too much, right? Meaning, you want to really stick to it. If that's your game model, you want players to become, really used to that and playing against that. Well, within that style against a number of different parameters. So you probably want them to be able to play against, with no pressure, meaning, maybe against a weaker team, for example, during preseason. But you also want them to play against teams that are on their level, and probably older teams as well. Because as you say, they're going to struggle to be able to do that, right? So, really, I think coaches being self-regulated and understanding that it's a process, and getting players to experience it before they step out onto the field for league play, for example. So within our club we have I'm on the girls side as girls ECNL director, so you know we have very competitive teams both up and down, but if we want to have a real challenge physically and tactically and technically, we'll play against one of the boys' teams, right? So that'll be a completely different structure for us, right? Um, and then as well, I guess what we try to do is we try to kind of link the phase of play to a kind of the state that we want to be in. So an example might be, when we're pressing, we want to be high energy, and we want to hunt and we want to be aggressive, right? So when we talk about defending, we really talk about the state that they want to be in, right? Versus when they're building or in possession, we want to be calm, we want to be focused, and we want to be in that flow state where we can kind of be a little bit free with our play, right? We don't want it to be too structured or too kind of organized, right? So I would say, yeah, definitely, getting, the players to realize that it's not always going to be easy. And then you as a coach also understanding, okay, rehearsing, okay, if this happens, then what are we going to do, right? So if we want to build up from the back and, they have a PSG press with Dembele type players on the top of the box who are going to press us, okay, what's our, I don't even like to call it plan B, right? What's our plan A point two, right? What's our plan A point three? So, okay, now, okay, are we going to maybe clip it into the left back? They control it and then we get into our shape, right? Or sometimes we need to send it long, compete for the second ball, get it down, and then we reset for our centre backs, right? So I think the problem occurs is when, you set the mentality or you set the president that everything's going to be easy and it's always going to be plain sailing, then we don't prepare our players for the times when it's going to be difficult, right? So if then statements we use them, if we concede, then this is what we're going to do, right? I like to, we try to implement at times a team huddle after goals scored and goals conceded so that we can reset our mentality and reset kind of our three keys to the game, right? So that obviously with all the things that are happening in games, as you say, players can forget, okay, we're trying to do this game, right? So it kind of like get the captains together, get reset, get on the same page. So yeah, those are some aspects to kind of deal with that performance pressure.
Yeah, you mentioned about, the technical and tactical part. So, I mean, that's something that most of us do look after, and the physical aspect to an extent. But, many coaches struggle with integrating psychological concepts into training. Now, since you've done quite some work around psychology, I thought it's best to ask you, what are some simple yet effective ways to begin this integration?
Yeah, great question. I think the first thing is obviously integrating obviously and communicating clearly as a coach what your we call it the rule of three, right? The what are your three main points throughout the game? So you want players to be very clear on what that is. Um, you know, educational psychology says that we can only focus on up to three things at a time, right? So for us, we try to focus on one attacking point, right? What as a team are we trying to do? Are we trying to switch the point of attack, whether if it's in the middle third of the field, right? Are we trying to break lines? Or are we trying to play in behind, right? Whatever it is, and then a defensive, and then we have what we call a word of the day, and the word of the day, it's really for the players to embody kind of what does that look like, right? Is it dominant? Is it aggressive? Is it calm? Is it focused? But that will be a word that I just constantly say to the players to remind them of how we want to act, think, and feel throughout the game, right? So I think with that rule of three, then we can go deeper into individual stuff. For us here in Tampa, we have general problems. I think that most players or coaches have where the players don't come, I guess, mentally prepared, right? They kind of come into games a little bit lax. in the training, it's a little bit loose and, they want to talk to their friends and they want to have fun, right? So, for me, that all comes down to a lack of focus and a lack of discipline with regards to what they should be doing, right? Because they've never been taught. So, for me, we try to identify match scripts, right? Dan Abrahams has spoken about match scripts, right? So we want to link our team match script. So okay, we're trying to switch the point of attack now as a group, as an attacking group. Um, what does that look like for your position? So we do positional profile work early in the season, so they understand. Okay, here's what is needed from me as a winger. Here's what's needed from me as a attacking midfielder, centre back, goalkeeper. Right now, how does our attacking focus of the day, how does that feed into you as the right back, right? So, okay, so as players developing down the left hand side and I see it swinging my way, I want to get into a position so I can get high and wide for my right centre back when receiving. Positive first touch forward, scan forward, and try to play forward, right? So that would be an example that, this isn't given to them, but that's the detail that we want to go into. So we get the players. We start our warm up kind of 30 minutes before the game because it's very hot here in Florida. So we want it to be kind of really just a 25-minute just kind of blast, right? Just to prepare them. So prior to that, they turn up an hour before. So we will ask them, okay, what's your match script look like? What are you focused on for today? Here's what we want to do as a team. So we'll do a think first. So first of all, I think it's super important rather than just, asking the team what they want to do. A lot of players are more, introverted, right? And they want to, they need to think about that first themselves. So we give them that opportunity for like 2 minutes as they're foam rolling or stretching. Then they'll pair up, preferably with a player that either plays their position or a player that is close to them on the pitch. So as a right back, maybe you're talking to the right winger or you're talking to the centre back, and they'll share, okay, I'm really looking to work on this positive first touch forward, hips open to face the field and try to play forward on my second touch, right? So now when they share together what they're working on, then they'll think hopefully of ways that they can support each other with that approach, right? So now as a centre back, okay, how can I help my right back to do that, right? So I want to also open my hips up and play their back foot quickly to be able to play forward as quickly as possible, as an example, right? So then again, it really gets them thinking, okay, what do I need to do in order for the team to be successful? And it involves them. And then they'll have a share. Just to kind of make sure that they've done the task. I'll ask the centre back to let me know the right back's kind of focus, and then the right back to do the centre back. So now they really need to listen, active listening, and ask questions if they're not sure, right? So I think again, hopefully not too complicated because that's based around the game, right? But what we're doing here is we're getting on the same page, we're getting focused, and we're goal setting for the game, right? We're goal setting for the game to get them in the right mindset to be able to, start the game off effectively.
Well, superb. Some of the inputs, some of the insights over here are fantastic. I think today's episode is going to be a tremendous guide to all the coaches and technical directors listening. Now, you, of course, deal with a lot of coaches, and as mentioned previously, coaches come with their own approach, their own way of doing things. So, in your current role, how do you help coaches transition from traditional coaching methods to more modern player-centered approaches?
And when you say traditional, what do you mean by that? Just kind of the old school kind of method
Yes,
of, or the coach is the teacher and the coach is the one that's okay.
basically.
So yeah, so I would take that, yeah, to more coach centered to more player centered, right? I would say the first thing is obviously we want to ask players to take responsibility for their own environment. So first and foremost, right, can we empower them to take control in certain areas, right? So can they set the warm up, right? Can they set up starting activities for young players? I think it's perfect to kind of have mini field set up. And then they pick the teams, right? First two players, they start 1v1, right? The next three players come. Now we're, 2v2 or 4v4, whatever, right? So really empowering the players to take responsibility, first of all. Um, I would say the power of questioning. This is one where I think a lot of coaches really struggle because I think here in the US, it's a very traditional environment where the coach is expected to have all the answers. Um, so perhaps we don't have as much the patience. Also, it's a pay-to-play model, which means that the parent really expects the coach to be the guide to the success of their player and to tell them. Plus, a lot of sports here in the US, football and things like that, are very, yeah, very just, yeah, do this, do that, very kind of autocratic. Very, again, it's just the way it is, right? So I think having a bit more patience and having the ability to, have a guided discovery approach. So, that ability to ask questions to gain the perspective of the player, right? Because oftentimes we assume that we know what's going on when in actual fact, we were not in that player's perspective because we're seeing it from our own perspective, right? So, having that understanding to just slow down and, for me, I use the framework of position, decision, execution, right? So was it a problem with the players' positioning as to why they didn't, make, the right action, right? Or they didn't execute something? Is it that they, didn't decide quickly enough or they made the wrong decision within the moment with that I can coach? Or is it an execution thing, right? Were they in the right position? They made the right decision, but then the execution of a pass or a dribble or a shot is just wrong, right? I think that can help coaches to really frame kind of perhaps what's going on for the player. Um, and then, within US soccer, again, I teach courses within the US soccer, development framework, the C licenses, and we're big on kind of a constraints-led approach, right? So, understanding how can we add constraints to the game to bring out certain um, things that we want to happen, right? So within the shape of the field, right, narrow field probably means you're going to have more passes going forward and breaking lines, right? Versus a wide field, we're going to have more possession, more slow build up, more switches of the point of attack and things like that, right? So thinking about, you know, where goals are placed, right? Where you have a goalkeeper, where you use end zones, right? We have a lot of discussions about what we would use within certain aspects of the game coming out, right? So that hopefully allows the player now to, within the rules of the game, they are bringing out Ben Bartlett's fantastic. He's now at Houston Dynamo, and he's been massive. I loved his book on constraints led coaching where he really breaks down a number of different ways that coaches can use constraints so that now we're not just telling them, okay, you need to do this or you need to do that. The game is very much the teacher, because the rules within the game really push the players to bring out those specific aspects.
Well, I think the examples you have given throughout the conversation are very powerful because it can really be, copied by a lot of coaches to their own success. So now, tactical periodization, how important do you think that is in the long-term development of both coaches and players, and where do most coaches usually go wrong with it?
Yeah, so I think tactical periodization, it's really understanding the bigger picture, right? And understanding, okay, that this is just a framework for us to, almost like at school, to make sure that we are hitting all of our points throughout the season. So I think where most coaches probably go wrong is the specificity, right? I think we actually probably don't go specific enough within specific areas. So at least again from our club and for me, we try to go pretty broad early on, right? Especially within that 4 to 6 weeks of preseason because we want to, re-establish the players within our style of play, what we want to do, both on the attacking side of the ball, defensive side of the ball, and both transitions. And then as the season goes on, when we have a little bit more time with them, we then want to break it down into, okay, what are the different ways we want to try and build against, this type of press, right? A very high press, a high block that's not pressing very high, but holding in that high block, or a team that's just sat off us, for example, right? So those might be the methods that we kind of build to, really work on that development of the players throughout the season. So getting really specific as to, what the game moment is, right? And then from there, we want to then probably give the players a little bit of ability to, again, make their own decisions, right? We want to talk about the what without talking. We want to give them ideas of the how, right? Because I think that's our role as a coach. But then, we want to, again, as you said before, leave opportunity for flexibility within that approach. So allow players to make their own decisions, right? To be creative. Two different left wingers are going to have very different approaches as to how they, can penetrate, right? Some I used to love just running in behind and making those runs constantly, right? Others are going to want to receive the ball to feet to beat players with their skill. Others are going to beat players with their speed, right? Versus other players are going to be more technical and look to combine, right? So that's just one example of how, we don't want to pigeonhole players as to, okay, you need to do this in this moment, because I think then we kind of lose it, right? So obviously understanding then that tactical periodization is the overall, infrastructure, but then from there we want to layer it down into, okay, here's the phases, okay, here's the players that are involved, and now here's the decisions that the players could make, right? So we want to get into a lot of detail before practices, our preparation with all the coaches involved as to, okay, I really want to focus on this aspect within, our final third penetration, for example, right? We really want to work on the movement from my, 7 and 11 to, attempt to receive the ball in behind, for example, right? This is where functional practices come in, where we're working on movement specific to a specific moment, right? And players can get a lot of repetitions within a specific moment. So this is how we're really kind of breaking it down by identifying kind of what we're focusing on. And then I would say just make sure that you have a review process, a way to really get back and understand, okay, what went well in this session? What did the players perhaps struggle with? What do I need to come back to? And then how are we going to kind of change the plan moving forward? Because obviously there's a plan, but then week to week, even practice to practice, we may need to change certain things based off of what the players are improving in and doing well in, and perhaps some of the other areas that they're struggling with.
So, what's your approach to developing a unified game model across different age groups without sacrificing individual creativity?
Yeah, so I mean, you could spend a whole free podcast talking on that, right? What my approach is.
Yeah.
Um, I think, first of all, we want to kind of understand what the principles are, and I like kind of what educators would call a backwards design approach. So that would mean that I want to understand what my first team is doing, right? And all the intricacies, and that's going to look much more complex than perhaps younger. But have a very clear picture of, in a perfect world, what we want our U19 or first team to look like. And then we really want to go back from that, right? So now our 17s probably maybe going to do that with a little less speed and maybe taking out part of the intricacies and then working back from there, right? So again, we want to do that, and then within that structure, I think what's super important is making sure that all coaches within that environment are able to have conversations about, that process for their team, because every team is different, and you're going to have certain players who kind of excel, right, and other players that are struggling with the concepts. So having that kind of policy of feedback again, so that the coaches can really understand, kind of, okay, here's what we're trying to get to them at U19, and so how does it fit in within their overall journey as a player, right? I'm teaching them how to, pressing and medium block, right? And all the principles. So again, it needs to be focused on the principles and not really a formation or a style, but the general principles that are just you know really focused within the game, right? So, things like, pressure, cover, balance, control and restraint, all of those aspects that are really central to the game, because then they can now do that in any system or style. Does that make sense? The system or style is
100%.
is less important there. Yeah. Say that again, sorry, Ryan.
No, absolutely, 100%. So, now with the way things are evolving, there are so many modern tools available like video analysis, data tracking, etc. So, how do you prevent coaches from becoming too robotic or, over reliant on technology?
Yeah, great question. I think that for a lot of coaches, keeping up is actually pretty difficult, with US soccer, for example, we require coaches to be very good with technology, right? They need to present, they need to upload video that is edited with their audio and their video kind of together. So video editing software, video analysis software, right? Uh, so first of all, I'd say to coaches that they probably need to spend some time learning a lot of these aspects, and one of the easy ways to do that is take the licenses because it's embedded within it, right? And then I would say being overly reliant on it, I would actually, flip that question and try to see how we can actually use what we have, right? Players, for example, are on their phones all the time, right? So for video analysis now, we don't have a specific like office or indoor facility that we can host video analysis. So oftentimes I'll send, set of clips to the players, and from their phone they can just watch it and they can take their notes, and then we'll jump on a Zoom call. So we're very technology kind of focused, right? There's certain parameters that we want to hit, right? So, cameras need to be on, and, the conversation needs to be flowing. So you need to manage that learning environment. But as you say, I think we try to actually use the technology because we know that, perhaps, a lot of the players may, that may be their only way of learning, right? So we want to kind of try to include those ways. So, quick, 10, 15-second videos, super important, right? About within a specific aspect, right? Versus us just telling them, right? And then what I like to do is really have players talk about the context. So I'll jump them into breakout rooms versus us talking as a group of like 16 to 18 players, right? And then I will ask specific players or maybe captains or even players that don't talk as much to be the spokesperson. So, okay, here's what we discussed, and there'll be a kind of focus on, okay, what went well, what did we struggle with, and how we're going to improve on it. So now we come back to the main room with them having discussed those aspects, and we'll kind of really, embed that knowledge together so that we can understand as a group, okay, here's the areas that we want to focus on.
Well, I really liked how you touched upon the players who are some of them being audio learners, some of them visual learners. So yes, that's a great way of using technology. And now, in your position, of course, I'm sure you have done research about coach education in the US as well as around the world. So in your experience, what are the most common gaps in current coach education programs around the world?
Coach education. So I would say, again, I'm a little bit biased, but I would say sports psychology, right? So, we touch on it a little bit within the coaching licenses and the ability to self-regulate, to be able to be calm under pressure, but really just understanding a player's psychology. and understanding the way that we communicate with them and how that can affect them on game day, or little simple tools and techniques like a positive sandwich, right, with regards to how we communicate, having clear communication, a lot of the stuff that Bartlett talks about with regards to the rule of three, right? Just 3 points, because just from an ability to, a memory aspect, they're not going to be able to remember 5 or 6 points, right? They're only going to probably remember the last two or three, So I would say, yeah, coach communication, ability to be able to talk to players based on their state, right? So a lot of coaches, when a player, you can see that they're clearly struggling within an environment. I saw a volleyball coach actually this week, or last weekend, and I was watching some games there, and you could physically see the players making mistakes and just the body language of the coach changing negatively every time that happened, and almost just berating them, right? And you know, it's just really difficult to see. But I think a lot of coaches, you know, that emotional regulation themselves, to understand, okay, I'm losing control. So first of all, we need to understand, okay, how can we reset? Because if we're in that frame of mind of fight or flight where we're struggling, or we're screaming, then we've already lost control. So okay, what is your technique? This is what we ask within US soccer. What's your technique during game days to come back to reality and to calm yourself down, right? Is it a 10-second reset where you're doing some box breathing, right, till you get your body down and you kind of focus on, okay, I'm in the moment, okay? Because only then can we be intentional with our coaching. So I would say, yeah, definitely understanding their own state, and then from there, can they communicate effectively with their players, right? Because sometimes we're not so clear on what we want to say. So something that's helped for me is writing down what I want to say, right? Because if it just comes out, it's still in my head. So I find that I need to go from head to written down to then spoken, rather than straight from head out. So that helps me. Some other people may be different. But yeah, those are definitely some gaps in coach education that I would love to see implemented for sure.
Sure, and if you have to give some more detail in with regards to coach education, how do you evaluate whether your coach education initiatives are actually translating into better team performances on the field?
So you mean as a director or
Yes,
a coach educator?
so basically, so one part is of course a federation running their courses. The other part is a club running their internal coach education courses. So it's the latter.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think as a club director, I would say you need to define KPIs, right? Key performance indicators, within games, right? Look, our club is in a very competitive conference, right? Where in the fall we play against some of the toughest teams in the country. So sometimes, looking at the wins or losses isn't always going to be it's not going to be sustainable for us to realize, okay, every time we lose, we're unsuccessful, and every time we win, we're successful, right? Because we lose a lot, and sometimes by a lot of goals, right? So I think that identifying key KPIs, right? As to, okay, what does success look like again during practice, and then identifying, right, what are the things that we need to do in order to be successful, right? How many in the middle third, how many line breaking passes do we make, right? How many forward passes do we make? How many crosses, into a danger area do we have, right? How many shots on goal, right? Touches in the penalty box, right? Again, we want to be careful because we don't want it to just become about statistics. But there was a crazy statistic done, that again comes in from US soccer, where, or not US soccer, just I think it might have been Jed Davies or Ray Power, but they mentioned, the ability of a coach to be able to recall key moments throughout a game, and it was less than 50%, right? So key aspects throughout the game. So our memory doesn't tell us reality, what's going on, right? I always use the example of our coaches. You're in a full game, and it in a half, your team is absolutely dominating. You have, 10 shots on goal, you're completely dominating. You're in their half the whole time, right? In the 44th minute of the game, the opposition gets a corner kick just because, the ball kind of headed off your centre back, for a corner. It's the first time they've been in your half. They cross it in, and they head it in, right? 1-0, you go in. What are you going to remember? The first 43 minutes of the game or the 1 minute where you conceded, right? It's that, balance of understanding that, key moments of the game, we're going to attribute more power to them. So us as coach, again, self-regulation, but we need to be taking account of the things that are going well and the things that are not going well, right? Because writing them down, that's again, we want to take into account the process rather than just the outcome.
Yes, definitely. Writing down does lead to accountability. And now, coming back to game models, what advice would you give to a young coach who wants to design a game model but doesn't really know where to start?
Yeah, so I think again, starting with the players in front of you, right? So where are they coming from? What are they used to? I think demographic and stuff like that as well is important. Um, and then from there, you as a coach, what's your experience? What do you feel comfortable teaching and coaching? You may need to seek outside coach education if perhaps you're not comfortable coaching a specific style or way of playing. And then again, identify again big action items. So what are the key principles that we want to really focus on, right? And then from there, obviously the sub principles, right? What are the hows, right? What are the ways that we want to try to do that? And then just have a feedback loop, right? Have a feedback loop of, okay, are we having success? Are we not having success, right? We need a little bit of consistency and opportunity for the players to really experience what you're teaching them on game day. So it may take a season first for you to realize, okay, we're going to stay with this game model. And then you just build from there, right? It's not something that is just one and done throughout the season. The best coaches are adding, taking away. To their game model, right? So I think having something to start from that really takes into account the players in front of you is super important.
So, would you say that consistency in a game model is important, or would you say game model should evolve every season?
Yeah, so I think I would say consistency is important, definitely. We want to have a general structure of how we want to play. That's why it's super important to understand who's in front of us, right? What is the demographic? Where do they come from? Where would they accept playing, right? Here, in Tampa, maybe a little bit more kind of middle class, upper middle class, right? Perhaps, certain styles of play aren't going to work, right? Versus, if you're in New York, I know up there it's like very, very aggressive, very kind of hard working, right? Known in the Northeast for that high pressing and things like that. So you want it to be congruent with the the environment that you're trying to where you're coming from, right? But then as you mentioned, it needs to be over time you make small changes, right? You make, this isn't quite working, right? We're playing a little bit too direct now, so perhaps we need to try to be a bit more progressive with our build up, right? So I think, the feedback will be from the players as well. Ask your players, what do they feel most comfortable with, right? When it comes to the style that they're playing. They'll tell you what they want to do, right? And oftentimes it's very difficult to persuade a team to play a certain way that they don't believe in, right? So get your players' feedback as well.
For sure. I think that this has been a very insightful episode for sure. There's a lot of examples you have given. There's a lot of your beliefs in the sport, a lot to do with flexibility in your approach. These are great learning points. Now, I know I've introduced you at the beginning, but let's hear it from you. How would you describe your journey in football and in coaching?
Yeah, so, I think I have quite a varied journey, right? So I grew up obviously in London, where I played soccer from young, to like my teens. Always loved the game. Kind of tried to pursue, half-heartedly. I was always pushed down the academic route, in school, but later on, maybe 17, 18, I tried to push to be able to play in like I played semi-professionally, but then, that tried to make that push to play professionally. And that was difficult for me, right? Because for me, the big issue was I was never the fastest, I was never the strongest, um, but I did okay, right? I did well. My issue was consistency, right? So the ability to be able to play well every single game. One game I'd be, score within the first 5 minutes, and then it would be the game of my life. And then next week, you turn around and something bad happens with you miss a chance in the first 5 minutes, and then it's the worst game of your career, right? So it's very inconsistent. So within that's what really led me down the path to coaching at a young age, probably around 21, 22, where when I was still playing, I was still kind of playing, and I went to college when I was around 22, 23 in the US, in New York, to pursue a scholarship there. But I was really started that coaching journey then. And within that, as I was, you know, coaching and playing at the same time, I really wanted to focus on, okay, how can I make um, this performance, right? How can I make it as predictable as possible, right? So what are the parts that I can control and what are the parts that I can't control? So that took me down the road of performance psychology, kind of studied that. I'd studied that back in England when I was still kind of playing. So yeah, throughout that process, I always embedded coaching within it. When I came to New York, I really started to pursue the coaching licenses and went down that pathway of really, understanding, it from the player's perspective, how to coach players, and then, went, coached at college, the elite youth, and then the pre-professional route in the USL2, previously the PDL, right? So a lot of high-level players, and then now within the last 3 to 5 years, coaching kind of collegiate athletes, elite youth athletes, and professional athletes as well within the one-on-one style, right? Kind of like how we're doing now with regards to, yeah, the mindset, right? And the different aspects that come up for them if it as it relates to the ability to be able to prepare for games effectively, right? The ability to visualize their top performance on match day, right? Their preparation before and after practices, right? Their recovery, their ability to be able to set goals, right? Where do they want to be at in 5 years, right? So really, all the questions that I struggled with when I was an athlete and a young coach, and yeah, so within that, it's kind of married together where I'm going down this route where I'm the technical director, but also working as a one-on-one coach to athletes. So I've really kind of enjoyed that journey.
So, this one-on-one mindset coaching that you do, is this open only to players from your club, or can anyone around the world take advantage of your knowledge and your experience?
No, yes. Yeah, definitely. That anyone can kind of join. There is a bit of a filter because obviously, for me, some athletes see it as kind of a quick fix, right? And just like anything else, to become, as a coach, right? You're not going to become Pep Guardiola within, 6 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Even if you have all of his training drills. So, really, for me, what's important is for the player to understand that they want to be a better player and person, right? And then I can help them. So within that process, obviously, there's a small kind of questionnaire that I ask. I always jump on a discovery call to kind of find out what their goals are, what are some of the things that they're dealing with, and then from there, we really start to see if there's alignment within our approaches, right? Can I help them first of all? Because I'm not going to just work with anyone who is kind of looking for a quick fix, or perhaps I'm just not best prepared to be able to help them, right? So yeah, if they want to learn more, they can definitely hit up my Instagram at Eric_high performance coach. I'm sure you can put it in the show notes or something. But yeah, I'd love to hear from anyone who has any questions too.
Superb. Well, I'm sure this is is already working wonders with players, and I hope with all the knowledge you've acquired, maybe in the future you offer this to coaches as well. So yeah, ending on a fun question. If you could build your dream coaching staff using any three coaches, only three coaches at max, past or present from any sport, who would you pick and what role would each play on your team?
Ooh, that is hard. Wow.
Meant to be.
Yeah, exactly. Let me have a think. Wow. Okay. I would definitely say Pep Guardiola. He's just like I love him, and I believe that tactically you definitely do need someone who is a an absolute genius, right? So Pep, I would say, definitely turning into and I think he's been able to adapt, right? Even you see his City now, they're not as playing as well, but for sure he's like an innovator. He's what I would call a visionary. I would say I'm a bit of a visionary as well. But he is able to adapt his approach to his environment for sure. Let me think. I'd say who is Michael Jordan's coach? What's his name?
So might
He
have
was
to
oh
check.
man. Yeah, I would say let's go with let's go with Steve Kerr then. I think, I would just want a real big culture guy. Um, because for me, culture and communication is a super important aspect, right? So he would kind of be that kind of assistant coach who, the players come to when, they need somebody to talk to, so really focusing on creating the culture as a wider organization, and then also just empowering the players to become the best version of themselves, right? So one soccer coach, one basketball coach. Um, One person who I really like is Brian Kane. Coach or player or people from outside the US may not know him. He's actually a mental performance coach. So he's one who I'm taking his program, and he would be kind of like I guess the performance lead, psychology lead, right? Where kind of he would focus on all the things that we've spoken about, right? With regards to understanding first of all the pre-performance routines, right? So how much sleep they get in, right? Big on, researching those types of things. But then things like pressure training, state regulation, making sure that we're in the right state of mind to be able to play, the what if moments. I think he would definitely get into that 100%. So yeah, I would say Pep, Steve Kerr, and Brian Kane for sure.
Superb, superb, Eric. This brings us to the end of the episode, and how insightful. It's really been amazing. It's my good fortune that this is the second podcast I've done with you. And yes, great new ideas, great new innovations since the last time we've spoken. So yes, a wonderful chat.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And appreciate all you're doing for coach education, man, Ryan. You're doing wonderful things. And yeah, looking forward to connecting again.